Introduction. The Iberian Peninsula, comprising modern Spain and Portugal, has long stood as a crossroads of civilizations. Its geographical position between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic made it a hub of trade, colonization, and cultural exchange. From the early 1st millennium BCE, Phoenicians, Greeks, and later Carthaginians established settlements along its coasts, intertwining with indigenous Iberian societies and laying the groundwork for centuries of religious, cultural, and political transformations. This report examines the settlement and influence of these Mediterranean powers, explores the syncretism that resulted, considers possible connections with the Hebrews or Israelites, and traces Iberia's eventual incorporation into the Roman Empire and later Roman Catholic tradition. The role of the Jesuit order in Iberia, particularly in the shadow of its Phoenician and Carthaginian colonial legacy, will also be addressed. Religious and cultural syncretism of Canaanites, Phoenicians, Hebrews, and Israelites, approximately 2000 to 1000 BCE. The peoples of the ancient Levant, Canaanites, Phoenicians, Hebrews, and Israelites, emerged from the same cultural and geographic milieu, making their distinctions more fluid than rigid. The Canaanites formed the broad cultural substrate of the region during the Bronze Age, practicing a polytheistic religion centered on deities such as 𝗼𝗆𝗶𝗁 and 𝗍𝗔. From this foundation, the Phoenicians, essentially maritime Canaanites, developed a seafaring culture that spread Canaanite religious and artistic traditions across the Mediterranean. The Hebrews and Israelites, likewise rooted in the Canaanite world, shared language, customs, and even deities with their neighbors. Early Israelite religion incorporated elements of Baal and Asherah worship before gradually shifting toward Judaism. Archaeological evidence, epigraphy, and genetic studies suggest that these groups frequently intermingled through trade, migration, and intermarriage, blurring ethnic and religious boundaries. Over time, the Israelites crystallized a distinct identity, but this did not erase their Canaanite heritage. Instead, the process of differentiation was gradual, and the cultural, genetic, and religious lines between Canaanites, Phoenicians, Hebrews, and Israelites were deeply intertwined, often rendering them indistinguishable to outsiders and showing how one group grew organically out of another. The roots of Roman Catholicism in ancient Near Eastern traditions. Approximately 2000 BCE to 1st century CE, the roots of Roman Catholicism can be traced, in part, through a long continuum of religious development, beginning in the ancient Near East. The spiritual lineage begins with the Sumerian and Amorite traditions of Mesopotamia, where deities, cosmologies, and ritual structures laid the foundation for later West Semitic religions. As Amorite and related groups migrated westward into Canaan, their beliefs intertwined with the indigenous Canaanite pantheon centered on 𝗼𝗆𝗆𝗁 and Asherah. From this Canaanite matrix emerged the Phoenicians, who carried the seafaring version of these traditions across the Mediterranean, and the Hebrews, Israelites, who gradually crystallized around the worship of Yahweh. The biblical patriarch Abraham, often identified in sources as an Amorite or Canaanite figure, symbolizes this transition, a migratory movement carrying Mesopotamian religious currents into Canaan, where they fused with local traditions. Over centuries, Judaism differentiated itself into a monotheistic framework, but its symbolic and ritual elements bore traces of earlier Canaanite and Mesopotamian practices. When Christianity arose from Second Temple Judaism and spread into the Roman world, it absorbed Greco-Roman philosophical concepts while carrying forward this layered Semitic inheritance. Roman Catholicism, in its theology, liturgy, and symbolism, thus stands at the culmination of a deep religious evolution that stretches back to Sumerian and Amorite origins, through Canaanite and Israelite faith, reshaped and universalized in the Roman imperial and Catholic context. These deep Semitic and Levantine roots would later intersect with the Mediterranean colonial networks of Phoenicians, Greeks, and Carthaginians in Iberia, setting the stage for centuries of cultural syncretism on the peninsula. Phoenician settlement in Iberia, approximately 9th to 8th centuries BCE, the earliest Mediterranean colonists to arrive in Iberia in significant numbers were the Phoenicians, seafaring traders from the Levant. By the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, they had established trading posts and colonies along the southern coast of the peninsula. Chief among these was Gadda, modern Cadiz, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Europe. Other important sites included Malacca, Malaga, and a series of smaller coastal emporia. The Phoenicians were primarily motivated by access to Iberia's rich mineral resources, especially silver and tin, as well as by opportunities for trade in salted fish, olive oil, and agricultural produce. Archaeological evidence, including amphorae, ceramics, and religious objects, reveals that these settlements were not massive population transfers, but rather small enclaves integrated into existing Iberian trade networks. Greek colonies and influence. Approximately 6th century BCE. From the 6th century BCE, Greek traders and settlers, mainly from Ionian cities, also established outposts on the Iberian coast, though their influence was more limited in scale compared to the Phoenicians. The most famous Greek colony in Iberia was Emporion, modern Empres in Catalonia, founded by Phoenician Greeks. Situated on the northeastern coast, it became an important center of commerce and cultural exchange. Greek influence is most evident in art, architecture, and coinage, where Iberian communities adopted Hellenic styles and techniques. While Greek settlement was geographically restricted to the northeast, their intellectual and artistic contributions added another layer to the cultural mosaic of Iberia. Carthaginian expansion and control. Approximately 6th to 3rd centuries BCE, as the Phoenician homeland declined, Carthage, founded as a Phoenician colony in North Africa, rose to prominence. By the 6th century BCE, Carthage expanded its control into the western Mediterranean, and Iberia became one of its most prized possessions. The Carthaginians founded Carthage, modern Cartagena, as a major administrative and military center, using it to control silver mines and to recruit Iberian soldiers. Unlike the earlier Phoenician settlements, Carthaginian rule was more centralized and imperial in nature, integrating Iberia into a vast Punic network that stretched across North Africa, Sardinia, and Sicily. The Punic Wars with Rome further elevated Iberia's importance, as Carthaginian generals such as Hannibal relied heavily on Iberian manpower and resources in their campaigns against Rome. Jewish presence in Iberia during the Phoenician, Carthaginian, and Greek colonies, approximately 9th to 3rd centuries BCE. Historical and archaeological evidence suggests that Jewish communities were present in Iberia alongside Phoenician, Carthaginian, and Greek settlements, though their numbers and influence were smaller and more localized. These communities likely arrived as merchants, artisans, and settlers, drawn by the peninsula's vibrant trade networks and strategic coastal cities. Living primarily in port cities, such as Gadda, Cadiz, and Emporion, Empres, Jews in Iberia would have maintained connections with other Jewish communities across the Mediterranean, particularly in Carthage, Tyre, and Alexandria, facilitating the exchange of religious, cultural, and commercial knowledge. Their religious practices were rooted in 𝗖𝗆ism, yet they were inevitably influenced by the dominant Phoenician and Punic cultures surrounding them, creating a hybrid environment where dietary laws, monotheistic worship, and local customs intersected. Intermarriage and social integration with Phoenician and Carthaginian populations likely occurred at certain levels, producing a syncretic cultural layer that blurred strict ethnic and religious distinctions, much as it had in Carthage itself. This early Jewish presence foreshadowed the enduring, though often challenged, Jewish communities that would persist in Iberia for centuries. Religious and cultural syncretism in Iberia The presence of Phoenicians and Carthaginians in Iberia brought profound cultural and religious change. Both peoples worshipped deities such as Melkart, Bolhamon, and Astarte, and traces of these cults appear in Iberian archaeological contexts. Temples, votive offerings, and funerary practices show clear signs of Punic religious influence, often blended with local traditions. For example, Melkart, the patron god of Tyre, was often associated with local Iberian deities or heroes, creating hybrid forms of worship. Material culture also reflects this syncretism. Iberian elites adopted Phoenician and Punic luxury goods, styles, and symbols as markers of prestige, yet continued to integrate them with their own traditions. This entanglement illustrates how cultural contact rarely erased indigenous practices, but instead produced new hybrid forms of identity and belief. Possible connections with the Hebrews, Israelites. Because the Phoenicians and Israelites shared a common Northwest Semitic cultural and linguistic background, similarities naturally emerge between their religious practices, myths, and even material culture. This has led to speculation about direct Israelite connections with Iberia. However, archaeological and genetic evidence does not support the idea of significant Israelite colonization of the peninsula. Instead, the similarities can be explained by shared cultural roots in the broader Levantin milieu. While Phoenicians and Israelites interacted in the ancient Near East, the evidence from Iberia suggests that Phoenician and Carthaginian colonists, rather than Israelites, were responsible for transmitting Semitic cultural traits westward. These complex networks of Mediterranean trade, settlement, and syncretism laid the groundwork for Iberia's integration into the Roman world, where the cultural and religious landscape would shift dramatically under Roman conquest. From Phoenician Carthage to Roman Catholicism, approximately 3rd to 1st centuries BCE, the Carthaginians originated as an offshoot of the Phoenicians, descendants of the seafaring Canaanites who had established colonies across the Mediterranean. Founded in the 9th century BCE by settlers from Tyre, Carthage, Carthaginians, new city, grew into a powerful maritime and commercial empire, extending Phoenician trade networks and preserving their religious traditions devoted to deities such as Bolhamon and Tanit. Over centuries, Carthage evolved into an independent political and cultural force, at times eclipsing its Phoenician mother cities. However, its rivalry with Rome culminated in the Punic Wars, which ended with the catastrophic destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE. The Romans not only razed the city, but also absorbed its surviving population into the Roman system, erasing Carthaginian political autonomy, while allowing certain Punic traditions to persist in hybridized form. As the Roman Empire adopted Christianity and eventually institutionalized it as Roman Catholicism, the descendants of Carthaginians and their Phoenician kin were gradually assimilated into the religious and cultural fabric of the empire. What began as the worship of Semitic gods in a great Phoenician colony was ultimately subsumed into the universalizing framework of the Catholic Church, sealing the transformation of Carthage's people into Roman subjects and, later, Christians. The absorption of Carthaginian and Phoenician traditions into Roman structures created a complex cultural and religious tapestry in which Jewish communities and other Semitic groups navigated survival and adaptation. Jews and Carthaginians, interwoven identities and conversion under Rome. Carthage, as a major hub of Mediterranean trade and culture, attracted a diverse population that included a significant Jewish community. The proximity of Phoenician and Israelite traditions, both rooted in shared Canaanite origins, facilitated a natural intertwining of culture, religion, and even kinship through intermarriage and interbreeding. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that Jewish populations lived alongside Carthaginian Phoenicians, sharing common Semitic languages and participating in overlapping social and economic networks. This environment fostered fluid cultural and religious exchange. Some Carthaginian Phoenicians adopted Judaism, drawn to its strict monotheism and covenantal identity, while some Jews integrated aspects of Punic society and worship. Yet with Rome's destruction of Carthage and its eventual Christianization of the empire, both Jews and Carthaginian Phoenicians faced immense pressure. Carthaginians were absorbed into the Roman order, and their descendants, like other provincials, were drawn into the structures of Roman Catholicism. Jews, too, faced restrictions and coercive measures, particularly in late antiquity, when conversion to Catholicism was often enforced. Thus, the once vibrant interplay of Carthaginian, Phoenician, and Jewish identities was ultimately subsumed under the unifying, but homogenizing framework of Roman Catholic Christendom. Roman conquest and the rise of Roman Catholicism in Iberia. The Punic Wars of the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE brought Iberia into direct contact with Rome. Following Carthage's defeat, Rome annexed the peninsula, gradually reorganizing it into the provinces of Hispania Ulteria and Hispania Cyteria, and later into Baetica, Lusitania, and Tarraconensis. Over time, Roman law, Latin language, urban planning, and infrastructure reshaped Iberian society. Roman religion, which itself absorbed many Punic and local Iberian elements, dominated until Christianity spread in the later Roman Empire. By the 4th century CE, Christianity became the official religion, and Iberia was integrated into the Roman Catholic Church's structure. This transformation established the Catholic tradition that would dominate Iberian cultural and political life for centuries. The consolidation of Catholic authority in Iberia set the stage for later religious institutions, including the Jesuit order, to exert significant influence across the peninsula and beyond. The Jesuit order in Iberia, approximately 16th to 18th centuries CE. The Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, founded in 1540, emerged as a key force in Iberia during the Counter-Reformation. In both Spain and Portugal, they established schools, universities, and missionary enterprises, becoming influential in shaping intellectual, spiritual, and political life. Their reach extended not only across Iberia, but also throughout the overseas empires of both nations, where Jesuit missionaries worked in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Their presence reinforced Catholic institutions and education, leaving a lasting imprint on Iberian society and culture. Jesuit expulsions and conflict with monarchies. Approximately 18th century CE, however, the Jesuits' growing influence eventually clashed with the rising power of absolutist monarchies. In Portugal, under the Marquis of Pombal, the Jesuits were expelled in 1759, and in Spain, they were expelled in 1767. These measures, part of broader European movements against the order, culminated in the papal suppression of the Jesuits in 1773, though restored in 1814. These expulsions highlight the tension between religious authority and political power, and underscore the complex role the Jesuits played in shaping Iberia's religious and social landscape. Conversos and the hidden continuity of Semitic traditions in Iberian Catholicism. Approximately 15th to 18th centuries CE, throughout the centuries of Iberian Catholic dominance, a complex phenomenon emerged. Conversos, individuals outwardly practicing Roman Catholicism, while secretly maintaining ancestral religious, cultural, or ethnic identities tied to Jews, Carthaginians, Phoenicians, or even broader Canaanite heritage. These conversos often operated within the highest ranks of the Church and the Jesuit order, where their positions provided access to information networks, political influence, and global intelligence structures maintained by the Vatican. Through these channels, conversos could subtly preserve, adapt, or transmit their traditional knowledge, beliefs, and practices, even while publicly adhering to Catholic orthodoxy. The persistence of these communities underscores the inherent contradiction in the assumption that forced conversion could entirely erase deeply rooted cultural and religious identities. History shows that attempts to impose faith externally often provoke covert resistance, preservation of forbidden practices, and, in some cases, efforts to influence institutions from within, ensuring that ancestral traditions remained alive and resilient despite centuries of pressure. The presence of conversos demonstrates not only the limitations of coercive religious policies, but also the complex, layered continuity of Mediterranean Semitic traditions, surviving and adapting through the institutional structures of Roman Catholicism. The expertise of hidden worship, Jews, and the practice of holy fraud, approximately 15th to 19th centuries CE. Over the centuries, Jewish communities have developed an extraordinary capacity for religious adaptation and concealment, sometimes referred to as holy fraud, wherein individuals publicly conform to a dominant faith while privately maintaining their own religious beliefs and practices. This phenomenon arose out of necessity. Repeated waves of forced conversions, expulsions, and persecution compelled Jews to practice their faith covertly in some of the most hostile religious landscapes in the world, from medieval Christian Europe to Iberia, under the Inquisition. Living under the constant threat of death or social annihilation, Jews became adept at navigating dual identities, mastering the performance of outward religiosity while preserving rituals, liturgy, and communal memory in secret over generations. This survival strategy only ensured the continuity of Jewish religious and cultural identity, but also honed skills of discretion, adaptation, and subtle influence, capacities that allowed Jewish communities to endure and persist through centuries of systemic oppression. Conversos and the legacy of hidden worship in Catholic hierarchies, approximately 15th to 18th centuries CE. Building on the centuries-long tradition of hidden worship, many conversos, Jews or individuals of Carthaginian, Phoenician, or broader Canaanite descent, carried these survival strategies into the very heart of the Catholic Church. Positioned within the clergy, the Jesuit order, and other institutional hierarchies, these individuals leveraged their roles to navigate a dual existence, publicly enforcing and embodying Catholic orthodoxy, while privately retaining ancestral religious and cultural knowledge. This practice of covert adherence enabled them to subtly preserve their traditions, influence decision-making, and access global networks of information obtained by the Vatican, all while avoiding detection. The repeated history of forced conversion made it clear that coercion alone could not erase deeply embedded identities. Rather, it often strengthened the resolve to sustain them in secret. These dual identities highlight both the resilience of ancestral faiths and the inherent limitations of religious authority in completely controlling belief, revealing a long-standing pattern of adaptation, subtle resistance, and the interweaving of hidden traditions within powerful institutions. Conclusion: Iberia as a crossroads of culture, faith, and hidden continuity. The history of Iberia reveals a complex tapestry of cultural exchange, religious syncretism, and resilient identities. Phoenicians, Greeks, and Carthaginians established colonies along the peninsula's coasts, introducing Mediterranean trade networks, art, and religious practices that intertwined with local Iberian traditions. The shared roots of Canaanite, Phoenician, Hebrew, and Israelite peoples created a fluid cultural and genetic landscape, where intermarriage, migration, and syncretism blurred distinctions, and allowed ancestral traditions to persist across generations. Roman conquest and the rise of Catholicism reshaped the peninsula, incorporating these populations into a centralized political and religious order, while seeking to suppress non-Christian practices. Yet, history demonstrates that forced conversion could never fully erase deeply rooted beliefs. Jewish communities, Carthaginian and Phoenician descendants, and later conversos developed sophisticated strategies of covert worship, survival, and influence, often operating within the highest ranks of the Church and Jesuit networks. These hidden continuities illustrate the resilience of ancestral faiths and the limitations of institutional power over belief, revealing how Iberia became not only a crossroads of empires and religions, but also a laboratory of adaptation, syncretism, and the subtle persistence of cultural identity. Across centuries, the peninsula stands as a testament to both the transformative influence of Mediterranean civilizations and the enduring capacity of human communities to preserve their heritage. Even under the most extreme pressures, since its inception, the Catholic Church has wielded immense power over belief, often targeting and suppressing systems it deemed heretical or pagan. From the forced conversions of Canaanites, Phoenicians, and Carthaginians in antiquity, to the brutal persecution of witches, mystics, and other marginalized spiritual communities, the Church acted as both judge and executioner in the name of faith. Yet history has a way of balancing its scales. Today, the cumulative weight of these centuries of coercion, secrecy, and oppression is reaching a breaking point. The container that once held the Church's abuses and hidden cruelties can no longer contain them. The moral and spiritual energy of the past surges forth, demanding acknowledgement and reckoning. This unfolding reckoning is not merely punitive, it is a call to transformation, a reminder that no power, however entrenched, can indefinitely suppress the universal laws of justice and conscience. The Church, and those who wielded it in the name of Jesus, now face the undeniable truth. The force of accumulated karma is rising, and the world is witnessing the eruption of centuries of injustice, urging humanity to confront, learn from, and finally transcend the shadows of the past.